To start off, we're going to talk about American Sign Language, which can be abbreviated ASL. It started off in 1814 by Dr. Thomas Hopkins. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so I'm going to butcher it, but I think it's Gallaudet. The primary language for those who are partially or wholly lacking of the sense of hearing, so like deaf or hard of hearing, they'd be using American Sign Language most of the time. This is known as a visual language, so it uses the shape of your hands, the movement of your hands, the placement of your hands, the facial expressions, and then your body movements all convey information of what you're trying to say. So first we're going to start off with an advantage, which is teaching babies before they can talk can be a huge benefit when it comes to communication skills. So teaching them simple words such as eat or tired can be a benefit for the parents, even for the baby when they're babies, before they before they're 8 months old is when they learn how to do these simple communication skills. So teaching those simple words can really help out a parent. And then secondly, we have learning a few simple words in ASL for those who would like to communicate with the deaf or hard of hearing. It's easy to do so, which is exactly what we're doing right now. And then the third one is improve small motor skills. So like the movement of our hands and like the small muscle tissues in our hands can really help those who don't really have the ability to do that. And then we have a couple disadvantages. The first one is requires full movement of the hands, which can be an issue for those who do have disabilities who really can't move their hands like that. That just means the ASL is out of the question for them because they can't move their hands, and that's how we mainly use ASL. And then secondly, we got deaf babies born into a hearing family can be tough on the parents and the child, which is also very true because it takes normally like 5 years to learn a language frequently. So just pushing that on the family right away as soon as they're born to find out their child's deaf, it's kind of tough for the baby and the adults as well. And that's all we got for American Sign Language.
Signed Exact English is also known as SEE, and it's a system that involves signing by matching signs with the English language. It's often paired with speech and auditory training and many other communication programs. About 75% of the signs that are used in SE are actually the same traditional signs that are used in all of sign language or other sign systems within the US. And Signed Exact English was created so that every child is able to establish the skills to have the ability to communicate with everyone around them. There are also many advantages and disadvantages to the system. SEE is very easily and quickly learned if your native language is English. This is just because it follows the same rules of the language that you're already familiar with. It's also very beneficial for those who have cochlear implants when it comes to sport. This way, children are able to match what they visually see with what they hear or what they speak. With this system, you are still able to communicate with those who use ASL as a method of communication, just because many of the traditional signs used in the system are also used in ASL. It also allows the child to have better communication with hearing peers, whether they sign or not. Some of the disadvantages are that it's seen as an attempt to help the deaf community by replacing their language with English to kind of influence them to fit in with the hearing community. So the deaf community frowns upon this system more than they like it. Also, SEE is not an actual language. Many people believe that it uses prepositions that slow down communication and makes it more difficult to follow a conversation. And lastly, children must be familiar with the English language in order to recognize the correct form of signed words.
Cued speech is a manual mode of communication that gives spoken words visual representations. So instead of full signs for words, there are smaller representations that make it easier to communicate with the deaf or hard of hearing if you don't fully know sign language. Cued speech uses 8 different hand shapes to differentiate consonants that have similar mouth sounds and 4 placements to differentiate vowel sounds, and those 4 placements have 2 possible movements. As you can see in the picture, the hand shapes are all for the consonants, and the placements are all shown by the dots on the faces. An example of this is if someone were to say the word bat, they would use the B hand shape and they would place it up by their mouth and say the word bat. That way that the person knows that they're using the B consonant. And same goes for the vowel placements. Cueing is used mainly by hearing parents of deaf children as a way to communicate before they learn all of ASL. Some advantages to this are that cued speech takes much less time to learn than ASL. Children that cue have been shown to have very high literacy levels, so it doesn't make them any less intelligent. And cued speech also helps children's speech perception, speech reading abilities, and their first language development. A couple disadvantages include that cued speech is not a very common communication mode, and some people believe that it slows down children's learning and comprehension of ASL because they think that it is sort of used as.
Oralism is a modality of language that encourages those who are deaf or hard of hearing to learn how to speak orally and read lips. Those who utilize oralism tend to speak and read lips rather than learn sign language. Some do simultaneously and others learn it later in life. Lip reading or speech reading is characterized by the person who is deaf or hard of hearing paying close attention to the speaker's body movements, gestures, facial expressions, emotion, all combined with watching them talk in order to understand what they're talking about. Speech language pathologists are the main provider of services for someone who wants to learn because they have to be taught how to mimic breathing patterns, watch the movement of the tongue and the mouth in order to sound like they're able to hear themselves. I'd compare it to someone getting muscle memory on how their therapy told them the sound should feel. School and special education teachers can also help an aiding student in mastering oralism. There is a lot of controversy over oralism. Some advantages of oralism are that if a child grows up and is able to speak and read lips accurately, they will develop as a normal child and be able to contribute to the hearing society. Some teachers also think that children are more apt to do better in school if they can read lips and speak. They are able to accurately describe what they want without needing the person's response in return, especially in a masked society where we are all unable to see people's lips. An assumption that the hearing person also does not know sign language. Lastly, if there's a neurological issue, muscle memory should make it easy to grow confidence in their speech. However, some disadvantages tend to outweigh the positives. In a masked society, you are unable to see their lips, and unless someone has a face shield or a mask with a window, which is very rare, and if that is the only way that they are able to communicate with somebody, if there's not like a pen or paper or like a phone around, that can be very hard to communicate with somebody because they have no idea what the other person is saying. Furthermore, not knowing sign language to the deaf community is very much looked down upon. The deaf community believes that sign language is their right to language, and forcing those who are deaf to learn to communicate orally is taking away their identity. And many deaf individuals are often skilled in reading lips because they already have to accommodate to a hearing world, but knowing sign language is very important to them. Finally, and most importantly, if a child grows up trying to learn oralism and they cannot do it, they will fall significantly behind in school and have a really hard time learning any language after that critical period. The Alexander Graham Bell Association was founded in 1890 and is now used to provide services to those who are deaf or hard of hearing. Bell was devoted to teaching deaf or hard of hearing individuals oralism, so the services provided are majorly in favor of that. Some resources that are offered are providing cochlear implants and hearing aids, funding for therapy if they meet the criteria, and they offer scholarships and grants that are funded by their chapters to their members all across the country.
Niall DeMarco was born May 8, 1989. He is a deaf American entertainer, model, and deaf activist. DeMarco grew up in Frederick, Maryland, and attended the Maryland School for the Deaf and will continue to graduate from Gallaudet University in 2013. After realizing that his large media profile was an opportunity to spread awareness of deaf culture, he founded the Niall DeMarco Foundation in 2016. Although he does not consider his deafness to be a disability, he created the foundation in hopes of providing a greater access to resources for all deaf children and their families. The Niall DeMarco Foundation explains that its mission is to exist as a national resource for all organizations, institutions, and individuals working to improve the lives of every deaf person in the world. Guided by the principle that every child deserves love and language, DeMarco and the Foundation are currently focusing on the education of deaf children and their families. Through partnerships with national organizations, the foundation strives to provide parents of deaf children with information, especially following the initial diagnosis of their child. The foundation provides resources for emotional support, opportunities to connect with other deaf or hard of hearing families, and resources involving early bilingual education in both English and American Sign Language. Henry Kessler was an American physician, surgeon, and medical pioneer. Kessler believed in treating the whole person rather than just the physical ailment, and he brought these same principles with him when he founded the Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation in 1949. Then in 1985, the Kessler Foundation was named in his honor. The Kessler Foundation has devoted itself to changing the lives of people with disabilities and has most recently donated over $310,000 to communication services for the deaf. Through this partnership with CSD, the Kessler Foundation is implementing new communication technology as an initiative to improve employment outcomes for deaf and hard of hearing job seekers. The CEO of CSD states that the company's mission is to redesign technology to access the previously inaccessible. In the future, CSD envisions a world where communication is open and transparent. They're quoted for saying, "A world where every deaf person can interact freely with others. It's not simply a far-fetched dream. It's our vision of the future, and it's why CSD exists and why we come to work every single day." CSD embraces communication through ASL, provides resources for online deaf communities, online communities for deaf African Americans, and continues working to develop new communication techniques, making use of technology and the internet.
Now we have fact or fiction, and the question or the statement asked is children who are taught sign language are put at a distinct disadvantage when trying to learn oral language / speech, and therefore deaf children should not be taught sign language ever or even first. And to me, that's fiction, and during the research, I think it's fiction as well. Sign language is just as important as to learning Spanish or French. Another point is hearing people who support oralism and do not want deaf people signing at all normally support this type of statement. They don't want anybody learning how to sign, they just want strictly speech, which is normally what hearing people would like. If they are born deaf or under any circumstances, it's best to teach a child of the community that they belong in, which only makes sense. That's what we do now, so why change it? And then lastly, the deaf or hard of hearing are not meant to learn speech. Being deaf and learning speech over sign language would defeat the purpose, which is pretty self-explanatory right there, and I think it makes all the sense. So that's it for fact or fiction.